Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Night had long since fallen on the deserted road, and a frigid wind blew unhindered across the plains. The physician, Dr. Jonathan Miller, was returning from a long day at the hospital in the neighboring town. The lights of his vehicle barely pierced the darkness. Then he spotted a trembling figure at the side of the road. He slowed down and his heart sank. A woman, visibly exhausted, was clutching a child wrapped in a coat too thin for the season. Their blue lips and fear-filled eyes struck him like a stab. Without hesitation, Jonathan stopped the car and got out, his breath clouding in the icy air. He knelt beside them, speaking softly so as not to frighten them. The mother, her hands clenched around the child, eyed him warily. But the urgency and compassion in the doctor's eyes did the rest. He wrapped the child and his mother in his blankets, carrying them to his car. Then, with the engine warm, the heater on full blast, and a look of determination in his eyes, he knew that night, their destiny had just changed. But what he didn't yet know was that this encounter would change his life as much as it would save theirs. The wind howled through the bare trees along the lonely road. Jonathan Miller drove slowly, his eyes searching for every shadow, aware that country roads could be treacherous, especially at this late hour. The fatigue of his day at the hospital weighed on his shoulders, but he couldn't help but notice the details, the glitter of ice on the branches, the almost unearthly silence around him. Then he saw them. A tiny figure on the side of the road, trembling, almost erased in the night. His first thought was that it was an animal, but the movement, the way someone was clutching something to their chest, made him realize immediately that it was a mother and child. Jonathan braked sharply, feeling his heart pound. He got out of the car, the cold biting his hands despite his thick gloves. "Hello, are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice piercing the icy wind. The woman looked at him suspiciously, her eyes reflecting fear, fatigue, and distress. The child, curled up in her arms, seemed to be shivering uncontrollably. The doctor didn't think twice. He approached slowly, took his blankets out of his car, and wrapped them around them. "Come on, I'll make you warm," he said, his voice firm but comforting. The mother hesitated for a moment, before giving in to necessity. Together, they climbed into the car, the engine roaring, the heater gradually warming their numb limbs. As Jonathan drove cautiously toward the nearest town, he noticed the child's gaze, curious but still worried. A strange feeling came over him. This wasn't just a medical emergency he'd encountered, but a destiny that had crossed his path. That night, Jonathan had no idea that this simple act of compassion would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever, and that of this mother and her child. As Jonathan drove cautiously, the silence in the car was broken only by the purr of the engine and the child's light breathing. The mother, curled up in the passenger seat, still held her daughter tightly against her, as if she could protect her from any danger. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked softly, trying to establish a connection without breaking their fragile trust. The woman hesitated, then whispered, My name is Emily. And she's Lily." The child raised her light eyes timidly to him, curious but still wary. Jonathan immediately sensed something was wrong. Emily seemed terrified, not of the cold, but of being found. Her hands were still shaking, and her gaze avoided any sign of threat. "What brings you alone on this road at this hour?" he asked, knowing the answer might be more complex than a simple misdirection. Emily looked down and spoke in a hushed voice, We had to leave. There was no other choice." Her words were vague, but enough to alert Jonathan. He understood that this wasn't just a late-night escapade or a reckless stroll. He sensed they were running away from something, or someone. Lily, still trembling, placed her small hand on her mother's. Jonathan noticed the quiet strength emanating from this woman, despite her obvious fear. She wasn't simply in physical distress, she was carrying the weight of secrets, difficult decisions, and perhaps imminent danger. As they approached the city, Jonathan decided they had to proceed with caution. He knew of safe havens and contacts who could provide them with temporary protection. But most of all, He knew that tonight would be the first chapter in a much larger story, a story where the compassion of a man would meet the courage of a mother determined to protect her child at all costs. Jonathan's car finally entered the town limits. The streetlights, sparse and flickering, cast a flickering light on the deserted streets. Despite the comfort of the heater, Emily hugged Lily close, as if to create a bubble of safety around them. Jonathan stopped in front of a small, old building, almost forgotten by time, that he knew well. Inside, a discreet shelter offered temporary shelter to those in distress. Emily glanced around anxiously before following Jonathan inside. The shelter smelled of old wood and hot coffee. A few volunteers were busy preparing blankets and meals. As soon as Emily and Lily entered, a respectful silence fell. Eyes fell on them, sympathetic but curious. Jonathan led Emily to a secluded room where they could warm up in private. He got out a change of clothes for Lily and extra blankets. Emily, still trembling, looked both relieved and wary. "You can stay here as long as you need to," Jonathan said. "No one will find you. But I need to know why you're here, alone on this road." Emily lowered her head, her throat tight. After a moment of heavy silence, she whispered, "My husband, he started stalking us. I had no choice, he's dangerous." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. This story was beyond anything he could have imagined. Emily wasn't just a mother in distress, she was on the run, pursued by a man who posed a real threat to her life and that of her daughter. Lily, vaguely understanding her mother's concern, snuggled closer to her, and Jonathan knew he had to act quickly. He knew contacts in the city who could ensure their temporary safety, but the situation also required strategic thinking. Every decision could be decisive for their survival. That night, Emily realized that their salvation depended on a perfect balance of trust and caution. And Jonathan realized that what had begun as a simple act of compassion would turn into a mission of protection far more dangerous and complex than he could have ever imagined. Night was drawing on, and the shelter, though safe, couldn't remain an eternal sanctuary. Jonathan knew Emily and Lily needed to remain vigilant. He'd put them in a small bedroom upstairs, but the slightest noise in the hallway seemed to amplify their anxiety. As he made coffee in the shelter's kitchen, Jonathan felt a sense of unease. His medical, but mostly human, instincts were telling him that danger was near. Emily, sitting on the bed with Lily, barely heard the shelter door open. A masked figure slipped into the hall. "No one is leaving here tonight," Jonathan said firmly, placing his hand on the visitor's wrist to restrain him, even though he knew physical confrontation wasn't ideal. Emily hugged Lily, her eyes brimming with fear and determination. She knew that running away was no longer an option, she had to act intelligently. Jonathan, aware that every second counted, took out his phone to discreetly alert a trusted contact in the city, a former police colleague who could secure their position. The figure, now aware that it could not act alone, retreated into the shadows, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Silence fell again in the shelter, but the tension remained palpable. Emily and Lily breathed more freely, but they knew that this night was only a warning. Jonathan placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "You're safe, for now. But you'll have to move soon, and stay one step ahead." Emily nodded, realizing their escape had reached a new level. That night, she realized that protecting her daughter no longer depended solely on luck or a doctor's compassion, they would need courage, cunning, and complete trust in Jonathan. Day was beginning to break, casting a grayish glow through the small windows of the shelter. Emily, sitting on the bed with Lily in her arms, seemed lost in thought. Jonathan, after assuring her that the immediate threat had receded, sat down opposite her, attentive to her every move. "Emily, I need to understand. Why is he stalking you?" he asked softly, knowing the truth would be painful but essential to protect them. Emily took a deep breath, Lily's fingers clenched in hers. "My husband. David, he's not the man everyone thinks he is. Her voice broke for a moment, before she continued, more determined. "He's violent, manipulative, and he wants to control every aspect of my life. He found out I made decisions to protect Lily, and he can't stand it. Jonathan felt a mixture of anger and compassion wash over him. He knew this wasn't just a domestic dispute, it was a real threat to their safety. Why not call the police, he asked, aware that sometimes the system could be powerless in the face of this kind of personal danger. Emily shook her head, her eyes misty with tears. He has contacts everywhere, people who can cover his tracks. Even the police could be compromised. That's why I had to leave, disappear. Jonathan understood that every future decision would have to be strategic. Not only would he have to protect them physically, but he would also have to anticipate David's every move. He took a deep breath. I will help you stay safe. But you must tell me everything you know about his habits, his contacts, and what he might do next. Emily nodded slowly, feeling that for the first time in weeks, she was no longer alone. In Jonathan, she had found an ally capable of transforming fear into action and protecting Lily. That day marked the beginning of a fragile but decisive alliance. The shadows of the past had not disappeared, but with courage and intelligence, Emily and Jonathan would begin to take back control of their destiny. Night had fallen again, but this time in the city, the streets were eerily silent. Jonathan knew he had to act quickly. Emily, though exhausted, listened intently to every word of the doctor who had become their impromptu protector. "Listen to me," Jonathan began, "we need to come up with a plan to get you and Lily out of David's reach. I know a few safe spots, and some trusted contacts. We need to move strategically, stay invisible, and never underestimate his determination." Emily nodded, fear giving way to cold determination. To protect Lily, she was prepared to do anything. Jonathan took out his phone and discreetly called a former police colleague, Mark Reynolds, who agreed to temporarily secure their hideaway and provide discreet surveillance. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, until the faint sound of footsteps outside caught their attention. Emily froze, her gaze searching the window. Jonathan approached silently and listened. The footsteps had stopped, but the danger was palpable. David was closer than they thought. "He knows we're here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe, but he doesn't know exactly where," Jonathan replied. "We have to use that to our advantage. Prepare to move in 5 minutes." They quickly packed a few essentials and clothes for Lily. Every move was calculated, every second counted. Jonathan gestured for Emily to follow him, and together they left the room through a discreet exit he knew well. As they walked away into the darkness, Jonathan felt a growing tension. The trap might already be set, and every decision could be decisive for the safety of mother and child. But one thing was certain, neither Emily nor Lily would be left alone to face David. That night, under the dark city sky, the cat-and-mouse game truly began. And for Jonathan, the mission was clear: protect these lives at all costs, even if it meant facing a man more cunning and dangerous than he had imagined. Night shrouded the city in a veil of darkness, but Jonathan and Emily knew they couldn't afford the luxury of safety. They had taken refuge in a small temporary apartment, prepared by Jonathan's contact, Mark Reynolds. Every room had been checked, every emergency exit identified. Yet danger was never far away. As Emily rocked Lily to sleep, a sudden noise at the door startled them. Jonathan grabbed a flashlight and headed for the door, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice firm but controlled. A cold laugh answered from the shadows. "Do you really think you can escape me?" David had just walked through the back door, taking advantage of a distraction to slip in. His gaze was filled with anger and obsession. Emily instinctively backed away from Jonathan, while Lily hugged her mother, unaware of the danger but sensing her mother's concern. Jonathan didn't lose his cool. He knew a direct confrontation with David would be risky, but he had to protect the two women at all costs. "You leave now, and leave this family alone," he shouted, placing Emily and Lily behind him. David stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face, but Jonathan sensed a flaw. David's arrogance made him predictable. With a quick movement, Jonathan signaled Emily to follow the pre-prepared fire exit. Within seconds, they slipped into the darkness of the corridor, leaving David fuming behind. A chase began through the dark alleys of the city. Emily's heels clicked against the pavement, but Jonathan led them, calculating every turn to lose their pursuer. Lily, in her mother's arms, seemed surprisingly silent, as if she sensed that her survival depended on their speed and composure. Finally, after several minutes of running, they reached a safe point where Mark and a few contacts were waiting to protect them. Breathless but alive, Emily looked gratefully at Jonathan. "Thank you. I don't know what we would have done without you." Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder, his face serious. "This is just the beginning. He will stop at nothing. But as long as we remain united, he will not be able to reach you." That night, Emily realized their fight was only just beginning. David was determined, but she had just discovered that the power of friendship and determination could be a far more powerful weapon than fear. The sun rose over the city, bringing with it a soft but deceptive light. Emily and Lily were safe, at least temporarily, thanks to Jonathan and his contact, Mark. But Jonathan knew that to stop David's threat, they needed to take action, not simply hide. In a small, discreet cafe, Jonathan gathers Emily, Mark, and another unlikely ally, Claire Thompson, a lawyer specializing in victim protection and dangerous domestic cases. Claire has already helped several people escape violent stalkers, and her presence brings a sense of strategy and legitimacy to the plan. "We must be precise and fast," Claire said. "David will stop at nothing, and he will try to isolate you. We will use the law, technology, and caution to neutralize him before he causes harm." Emily nodded, feeling real control over the situation for the first time. Jonathan outlined their strategy: discreet surveillance, documentation of every threat, and preparation for immediate legal intervention if David attempted further contact. "What if we have to confront him directly?" Emily asked, her voice shaky but determined. Jonathan exchanged a look with Claire and Mark. "Then we'll be ready. But our priority remains your safety and Lily's. Everything else must be calculated." Over the next few days, they put their plan into action. Emily and Lily were moved to various secure locations, with David under constant surveillance to anticipate his movements. Every call, every message, every sign of his presence was recorded and analyzed. But what David didn't know was that this unexpected alliance was stronger than his resolve. He thought he could control the situation through fear, but Jonathan, Claire, and Mark had prepared an invisible net, ready to close at the right moment. One evening, when all seemed calm, Jonathan received a cryptic message: David had just made a risky decision. Tensions rose instantly. Emily felt the familiar pang of anxiety, but this time, she wasn't alone. "He's coming," Jonathan murmured, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We're ready," Emily replied, her hand gripping Lily's tightly. That night, the unlikely alliance would put into motion the plan that could finally end David's terror and ensure the safety of mother and daughter. The game of cat and mouse was reaching a critical turning point. The night was pitch black, but every sound seemed amplified in the small, safe house where Emily and Lily were temporarily hidden. Jonathan, Claire, and Mark were all on high alert. The message received earlier left no doubt: David was about to act. Suddenly, a metallic noise sounded outside. Jonathan silently approached the window and saw a familiar figure, David. His face expressed anger and obsession. He had tried to force his way in. "He will stop at nothing," Emily whispered, her voice trembling, but determined to protect her daughter. Jonathan signaled to Mark and Claire, and everyone got ready. The strategy they had meticulously planned was finally about to be tested. Jonathan turned on an outdoor surveillance camera, while Claire prepared the legal documents and emergency calls ready to be sent. David forced open the door, but before he could enter the house, a blinding light and the shrill sound of a deterrent alarm stopped him in his tracks. Jonathan had anticipated this move and activated the security system, as well as the discreet reinforcement of the local police alerted by Claire. Panicked, David backed away, realizing he was no longer in control. The sirens were getting closer, and soon the firm voices of police officers filled the garden. David, unsettled, realized his hunt was over. Emily, holding Lily close, felt a wave of relief. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. Jonathan placed a protective hand on her shoulder. It's over. You're finally safe. David was apprehended peacefully, and his malevolent influence neutralized thanks to the coordination between Jonathan, Claire, Mark, and law enforcement. Emily and Lily were finally able to return to a semblance of normalcy, free from the fear that had accompanied them for so long. That night, Emily realized that courage and alliance could triumph over fear and obsession. Jonathan, meanwhile, realized that sometimes a simple act of compassion could set in motion a chain of events capable of saving lives and restoring justice. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the room where Emily and Lily slept peacefully. For the first time in weeks, the silence was no longer laden with fear or tension. Jonathan, sitting a few feet away, watched them, a small smile on his lips. The danger was behind them. David had been arrested, and thanks to the evidence and the vigilance of Claire and Mark, he would be held accountable for his actions. Emily, for the first time, felt a freedom that had seemed impossible to achieve. "Thank you, Jonathan," Emily whispered, her eyes shining with gratitude as she watched her daughter play with a toy on the floor. "You've given us more than security, you've given us hope." Jonathan nodded humbly. "You were incredibly brave. I only did my duty, but you showed a strength that few possess." Over time, Emily and Lily were able to rebuild their lives in a new apartment, surrounded by support and kindness. They knew that fear could resurface, but they now had the tools and allies to face it. Jonathan remained a quiet friend and protector, always present but respecting their newfound independence. The memory of that icy night on the deserted road remained etched in their minds. But this memory was no longer just one of fear, it had become one of courage, resilience, and human compassion capable of changing lives. Emily, holding Lily's hand, looked up at Jonathan and said with a smile, "We have passed through the shadow, and now, we see the light." Jonathan smiled back, knowing that sometimes a simple act of kindness could not only save lives, but also transform destinies. And for this mother and daughter, the future was finally full of promise.